Imagine this. You are standing in the grand ballroom of the Savoy in London, surrounded by 300 millionaires, at the wedding of your own son, and your father points directly at you and announces loudly, "This is the family disgrace we simply have to live with." What would you do to escape that kind of humiliation? For 25 years, I was the black sheep of the Harrington family. I was the teenage mother who chose technology over prime real estate, the daughter without an Oxford degree who tinkered with computers, while my privately educated brother took over the family empire. My father made sure that every investor in the City of London knew exactly how disappointed he was in me. He even sent out emails warning them about my supposedly amateurish projects. What he didn't know was this. Behind a corporate veil, I had been quietly building something of my own, something worth £2.3 billion, and his biggest business partner was standing merely feet away, on the verge of recognizing me as the mysterious buyer who was turning the UK tech sector upside down. My name is Eleanor Harrington. I am 42 years old, and this is the story of how my father's public humiliation of me became his £500 million mistake. If you resonate with this, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. The Harrington family built their property empire over 3 generations, boasting a portfolio worth roughly £500 million when I was born. My father, Lord Robert Harrington, never let anyone forget it. Every introduction started the same way: Robert Harrington, of Harrington Estates. He had 2 children, but in his eyes only one heir. My younger brother, Alistair, was born with advantages I was never afforded. While I was an 18-year-old single mother, working 3 jobs to pay for my courses at a local further education college, Alistair was being groomed at Eton. When I was debugging code for my startup at 3:00 a.m., he was networking at the Carlton Club in St. James's. His MBA from Oxford's Saïd Business School was framed and hung in our father's office before it ever graced Alistair's own wall. "Alistair is the future of the Harrington Empire," my father would say, at endless charity galas and exclusive Mayfair dinners. He understands what it means to preserve a legacy. And me? I was the cautionary tale. "My daughter Eleanor is in the computer trade," he would say with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if I had joined a cult rather than founded a technology firm. The rest of the sentence always remained unspoken. The one who got pregnant in 6th form, the one without a Russell Group degree, the one who chose some internet fad over prime London real estate. Alistair drove a Bentley Continental GT, a graduation gift from our father. I drove a Tesla Model 3 that I had paid for myself. At family gatherings, he sat to our father's right. I sat wherever there was an empty chair. My little tech startup employed 200 people, but from the way my family spoke about it, you would never have guessed it was a functioning business at all. 3 months before the wedding that would change everything, my son Arthur graduated from Imperial College London Medical School, 4th in his class, without taking a single penny from his grandfather. However, you wouldn't have known that from the announcement my father sent to his business contacts. "The Harrington family is proud to announce that Arthur Harrington, grandson of Lord Robert Harrington, has taken his degree at Imperial College," it read. Not a single word about the single mother who had worked 18-hour days to finance his education. When Arthur decided to get married straight after graduation, I wrote a cheque for £327,000 and paid for the entire wedding. Every English rose arrangement in the Savoy ballroom, every bottle of Pol Roger champagne, every hand-pressed invitation, everything was on me. Yet, the invitations sent to the upper echelons of London society read, "Lord Robert Harrington cordially invites you to the wedding of his grandson." 2 weeks before the wedding, my assistant forwarded me an email. Someone in my father's circle had blind copied her. He wrote to the extended family, "Despite Eleanor's situation, we are managing to put together something respectable for Arthur. I have ensured the right people will be in attendance." My situation. As if a self-made CEO career was some sort of handicap. I saved that email in a folder on my desktop named Legal. For years I had been collecting things there without entirely knowing why. Call it instinct. On the morning of the wedding, I stood before my wardrobe, looking at 2 dresses, a bespoke Stella McCartney couture gown and an understated classic Burberry dress from 3 seasons ago. I chose the Burberry. Let them underestimate me one last time. 3 months prior, the financial press had gone into a frenzy. A mysterious buyer, operating through a holding company called Vanguard Holdings, had acquired 6 companies in rapid succession. Total value, £2.3 billion. All cash transactions. The Financial Times dubbed the figure the phantom buyer. Forbes UK asked, who is behind Britain's biggest tech shopping spree? Tech hubs in Cambridge and London speculated about sovereign wealth funds or secret corporate mergers. They were all wrong. I was sitting in my office watching the speculations on Bloomberg News, while Fiona Sterling, managing partner at Sterling, Cavendish and Partners, prepared the paperwork for our next acquisition. "You should go public with this, Eleanor," she said, not for the first time. "The board is ready to present you as CEO. This secrecy is no longer necessary." "Not yet," I replied, watching the screen where analysts debated Vanguard's next move. "The timing isn't right." "And when will it be right?" I thought of the email in my legal folder. For 25 years I had been introduced as a liability, and my son's wedding was just around the corner. I would know the right moment when it arrived. What the press didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that one of those 6 companies was TechSource Limited, the primary supplier for the smart home division of Harrington Estates. My brother, Alistair's entire flagship modernization project depended entirely on them. I hadn't targeted him. That would have been petty. I simply bought an undervalued company that happened to control 73% of its supply chain. The fact that it suddenly gave me leverage over the family business that had excluded me for decades. Let's just call that a happy coincidence. Fiona locked the FCA filings in her briefcase. "These documents go public the second you say the word," she said. Soon, I thought. Very soon. The ballroom at the Savoy could accommodate 500 guests. We were a party of 300, which meant everyone could see everyone else. It was exactly the kind of intimate grandeur my father thrived on. Baccarat crystal chandeliers bathed the bespoke tailoring and designer gowns of London's elite in perfect light. I arrived, as always, alone. The seating plan on a gilded easel told me everything I needed to know about my place in the family hierarchy. Table 1, Lord Robert Harrington, Alistair Harrington, and his wife. Table 2, the Wentworths. Charles Wentworth of Wentworth Industries and his family. Tables 3 through 11, VIPs, business partners, prominent relatives. Table 12, additional family. Not family, not VIP, just additional. I took my seat between a distant cousin who sold insurance in Surrey and my father's ancient aunt, who spent the entire cocktail hour asking me why I hadn't managed to find a new husband yet. From table 12, I had a clear view of the top table where my father was holding court. Alistair sat to his right, looking every inch the crown prince. Charles Wentworth looked over from table 2 and nodded. We had never met face to face, but his gaze betrayed recognition. I made a mental note of it. My father stood up, a champagne flute in his hand, and the room fell silent. He had that effect on people. He commanded attention as though it were his birthright. "Before we celebrate the union of my grandson Arthur and his beautiful bride," he began, his booming voice reaching every corner of the ballroom, "I want to speak about family, about legacy, about what it means to be a Harrington." Alistair sat up straighter. He knew this speech was as much for him as it was for Arthur. Then, my father pointed directly at me. "Let me introduce you to my children," he said, sweeping his gaze from the top table all the way to my corner. "Most of you know Alistair, educated at Eton, an Oxford MBA, the future of Harrington Estates. He has grown our portfolio by 30% in just 5 years, a true Harrington." Polite applause rippled through the room. Alistair stood briefly, accepting the recognition with practiced, false modesty. And then my father continued, his finger still aimed at my table. "And that is Eleanor." The pause stretched out, excruciatingly long. "She's here too." Nervous titters echoed. I remained completely still, counting the bubbles in my untouched champagne. "The family disgrace we simply have to live with," he added with a theatrical sigh that elicited louder laughter. "Every family has one, don't they?" The laughter spread like wildfire. 300 people. 300 people laughing at the casual cruelty of a father. Someone from table 5 called out, "At least she turned up." More laughter. My son Arthur began to stand, his face flushed with absolute fury. I caught his eye, and gave a barely perceptible shake of my head. "Not yet. She runs some sort of internet thing," my father continued, now fully in his element. "No Oxford degree, no proper education. A single mother at 18. But family is family, even the disappointments. We don't get to choose them, do we?" From table 6, my Aunt Beatrice called out, "Poor Robert, you did your best with both of them." I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor, the sound slicing right through the laughter. For a moment, the room thought I was going to leave. I simply stood there, saying nothing, holding my father's gaze. He interpreted my standing as capitulation. His smile widened. "Oh, don't leave just yet, Eleanor. I haven't quite finished embarrassing you." More laughter, though it sounded a bit strained in places now. "I was just about to tell everyone about your latest little project." "What is it? An app? A website?" "It's a technology firm, Father. I said quietly. My voice echoed in the sudden silence. A technology firm, he repeated mockingly. That's what they all call it these days, isn't it? Everyone is a CEO of something on the internet. Alistair here runs real business. Property. Tangible assets. Things you can touch. Things that matter. He gestured grandly to my brother. 50 million in revenue last year alone. And what Eleanor does. He waved a dismissive hand. Well, let's just say she won't be buying any buildings in Mayfair anytime soon. Robert, perhaps. Someone began. A toast, my father interrupted, raising his glass high. To the Harringtons who matter. To Alistair, who carries our legacy. To Arthur, who has made something of himself despite his mother's circumstances. And to those who marry into success, rather than earning it. I saw my son's knuckles turn stark white as he gripped his glass. His new wife whispered something to him, likely trying to calm him down. Sit down, Eleanor, my father commanded. You're making a scene. I remained standing. Am I? At that exact moment, Charles Wentworth stood up from table 2. His movement was so decisive that it drew every eye in the room. Excuse me, Robert, he said, his voice cutting through the heavy tension. I need to clarify something. Before Charles could continue, Arthur stood up at the top table, his voice trembling with restrained rage. Grandfather, my mother's company is successful. More successful than yours. Success is relative, my boy. My father cut him off with a patronizing chuckle. Your mother runs a small operation. Admirable, in its own quaint way. Like a children's lemonade stand is admirable, but let us not confuse it with genuine enterprise. Genuine enterprise? Arthur's voice hardened. Do you even know what she... I know she couldn't have afforded this wedding without my charity, my father interrupted smoothly. I know she drives a Tesla while your uncle Alistair drives a Bentley. I know she lives in a terraced house in Islington, while we own half of Belgravia. These are facts, Arthur. Numbers do not lie. Alistair now chimed in from the top table. Arthur, your grandfather is just trying to put things into perspective. The tech bubble makes everyone think they're the next Steve Jobs. But real wealth, generational wealth, comes from real assets. Exactly, my father agreed. Your uncle Alistair understands this. He is running a true empire. And your mother? What exactly is she managing? A website, a few servers, and some teenagers in hoodies. The ballroom was dead silent. The only sound was the soft clinking of crystal as someone nervously set their glass down. My son's face had gone from red to a pale, ghostly white. You don't know anything about her business, Arthur hissed. I know enough, my father said with terrifying finality. Now, both of you, sit down. This is a wedding, not an AGM. But Charles Wentworth remained standing. He now pulled out his mobile phone. Actually, Robert, he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, is this not the perfect moment for an AGM? If you've ever been the black sheep of your family, the one who didn't follow the dictated path, remember, your worth is not defined by their validation. Write I know my worth in the comments if you've ever felt invisible at a family gathering, and please share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Charles Wentworth held his phone up. The Bloomberg app was clearly visible on the screen. I have to ask something, he said, looking directly at me. You are Eleanor Harrington. The Eleanor Harrington. My father laughed, though it sounded distinctly forced now. Charles, what on earth are you talking about? I am talking about Vanguard Holdings, Charles answered, his voice rising in volume. The phantom buyer. The entity that has been acquiring one major firm after another over the last few months, including mine, last week. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Several guests discreetly pulled out their phones. You're mistaken, my father said, his unwavering certainty finally showing a hairline fracture. My daughter doesn't even know what Vanguard Holdings is. Your daughter, Charles said very slowly and clearly, paid me £400 million in cash for Wentworth Industries 5 days ago. The contracts are signed. The murmur turned into audible gasps. At table 3, a prominent banker was tapping frantically on his screen. That is impossible, Alistair shouted, jumping to his feet, his face crimson. That is absolutely impossible. It's literally on the front page of Bloomberg right now, Charles said, turning his phone so several people could see it. Vanguard Holdings unveils CEO Eleanor Harrington. Net worth, £2.3 billion. My father's face drained of all colour, turning from a flushed pink to chalk white in seconds. His champagne flute slipped from his fingers and shattered against the Savoy's marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. This is a sick joke, he whispered. A mistake. No mistake, Charles replied calmly. I spent 3 months negotiating with her team, The woman you just called a family disgrace currently owns 6 major corporations, mine included. He looked at Alistair. And, if I'm not mistaken, your primary supplier as well. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto me. I remained standing, saying absolutely nothing, simply watching as my father's entire reality fractured. She bought my firm last week, Charles repeated for the benefit of the back rows. 400 million in cash. One of 6 acquisitions in 3 months. The ballroom erupted. Phones were whipped out everywhere. Searching, reading, confirming. It's true, someone shouted from table 7. The Sunday Times Rich List is reporting it. The Financial Times too. It's everywhere, added another voice. Vanguard Holdings is the phantom buyer everyone in the city has been talking about. My father gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. There must be another Eleanor Harrington, he stammered. This is impossible. My daughter couldn't afford this wedding without my help. Actually, she could, I said quietly, my voice slicing effortlessly through the chaos. I paid for this wedding. Every single penny. You're lying, he hissed. The wedding planner, who had been standing nervously near the service doors, stepped forward. Actually, Lord Harrington, she said timidly. Miss Harrington paid the balance in full 3 months ago. I have all the receipts. Alistair was scrolling frantically on his phone in a sheer panic. This can't be right. I would have known. Someone in the city would have told me. Told you what? Charles asked. That your sister, whom your father just publicly humiliated, is worth more than your entire family put together. Someone else began reading aloud from their phone. The Times says, she has operated under the radar for 2 decades. Founded her first company at 22, sold it at 28 for £50 million, and reinvested every penny. My father's face was now a sickly grey. Stop, he said weakly. Please, stop. But the truth had gained its own momentum, and absolutely nothing was going to stop it now. This is a massive misunderstanding, my father pleaded desperately, gathering the last shreds of his authority. It has to be another Eleanor Harrington. My daughter runs a tiny tech startup. She drives a Tesla, for God's sake. She lives in Islington, not Mayfair. He turned to me, his tone caught somewhere between begging and commanding. Tell them this is a mistake, Eleanor. Tell them the truth. I remained silent. This is ridiculous, Alistair interjected, his Oxford-polished confidence audibly shattering. I know every major player in the London property and tech sectors. I would know if my own sister. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Would you? I asked softly. When was the last time you asked me about my company? When did any of you ever ask about my little startup? My father scoffed dismissively, clinging to a final straw. Your internet thing. My little startup was acquired 8 years ago, I said calmly. Since then I've been building something else. But you never bothered to ask, so I never bothered to tell you. That is impossible, my father repeated, like a mantra. Charles, this is a terrible joke. Someone is making a mockery of us. My daughter does not have that kind of money. It simply cannot be. Robert, Charles said, his voice almost tinged with pity now. I have seen the contracts. I have met her legal team. And quite frankly, I have seen the bank transfers. Your daughter bought my company. At that precise moment, the grand double doors of the ballroom swung open. Fiona Sterling walked in, pulling a leather rolling briefcase behind her. Every head turned as she strode calmly across the room. My father's eyes widened in sheer terror. Who is this? What is the meaning of this? That, I said, is my solicitor, Fiona Sterling, managing partner at Sterling, Cavendish and Partners. Several corporate lawyers in the room recognized her instantly. The hushed murmurs confirmed my father's deepest fear. This was real. Anyone can claim anything, my father said, his voice dripping with desperation. Anyone can hire an actress, mock up fake websites, spread rumors. I demand proof, genuine proof. I looked at him for a long time. 25 years of belittlement, of public humiliation, of constantly being introduced as a disappointment, had led exactly to this moment. You want proof? I asked quietly. Fiona, would you mind? Fiona walked through the parting, silent crowd, the click of her heels echoing off the marble. She placed her briefcase onto table 12, the overflow table, the side table, the table for the irrelevant extras, and popped the locks with deliberate precision. My father actually laughed, a hollow, echoing sound. What is this supposed to be? Theatre? Have you hired a struggling actress to play a high-powered solicitor? It's pathetic, Eleanor. Simply pathetic. Miss Sterling is not an actress, a voice called out from table 4. She represented my firm in a merger last year, and she sits on the board of the Law Society, someone else added. Fiona pulled out a thick dossier labelled FCA filings, Confidential until publication. Lord Harrington, she said briskly. I represent Vanguard Holdings and its CEO, Ms. Eleanor Harrington. These documents are the official regulatory filings published yesterday at 4 p.m. GMT. She placed the heavy stack of documents on the table. Several guests instinctively stepped closer. These filings can be verified by anyone with access to Companies House, Fiona continued. The acquisitions of Wentworth Industries, TechSource Limited, Meridian Solutions, Apex Systems, ClearPath Digital, and Innovate Partners. Total valuation, £2.3 billion. My father stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. Forged, he muttered. This has to be forged. The Financial Conduct Authority does not register forgeries, Lord Harrington, Fiona replied smoothly. 3 executives from different firms gathered around the table. One of them, the CEO of a major city bank, put on his reading glasses and scrutinized the pages. They're genuine, he concluded heavily. I know this format. These are legitimate filings. Another executive was on the phone. My assistant is checking Companies House right now, he announced to the room after a brief pause. Confirmed. Vanguard Holdings, CEO, Eleanor Harrington. It's all there. Signatures, certifications, registration numbers. All authentic, the banker agreed. Robert, your daughter is indeed the phantom buyer. My father stumbled backwards, gripping the back of Alistair's chair to keep from falling. But she never said anything, Alistair protested weakly. Why didn't she tell us? Tell you? I asked softly. When, exactly? During the family dinners I wasn't invited to. At the business meetings where I was told I wouldn't understand genuine enterprise anyway. Or tonight, perhaps, somewhere between being called a disgrace and a disappointment? The article in the Financial Times from last month, a man at table 5 read aloud from his screen. Vanguard focused on strategic acquisitions within the tech supply chain. He looked up at Alistair, his eyes wide. Hold on a minute. You use TechSource for all your smart home systems, don't you? Alistair's face turned ashen as he frantically swiped at his phone. No. What is happening? My father demanded. TechSource, Alistair squeaked, his voice cracking. They supply 60% of our systems. 73%, I corrected calmly. As of Tuesday, following the integration of Meridian Solutions, the silence in the room was absolute. Alistair looked like he might actually vomit. You targeted me, he whispered. Your own brother. I targeted no one, I replied evenly. I purchased undervalued companies with solid fundamentals and excellent growth potential. The fact that you built your entire £200 million modernization strategy on a single supplier is simply atrocious risk management. Alistair, didn't they teach you about diversification at Oxford? Someone at table 8 had pulled up more data. Good Lord, he muttered. The new parent company of TechSource controls the entire supply chain for smart home technology in the southeast. And that means, another voice calculated aloud, she effectively decides whether Harrington Estates can ever finish its £200 million flagship project. Alistair was typing like a madman. This can't be legal. This is sabotage. This is business, I interrupted him. Exactly the kind of business Father has been conducting for 40 years. Leverage, positioning, strategic advantage. Isn't that right, Father? My father hadn't moved a muscle. He was staring at me as if seeing me for the very first time. You planned this, he breathed finally. This was all planned. I spent 20 years building a company, I corrected him, while you told all of London I was playing with computers, while you paraded Alistair around as the future and painted me as an absolute failure. Our contracts with TechSource are valid for another 2 years, Alistair suddenly blurted out, looking up from his screen with a desperate gleam of hope. They are, I agreed, and Vanguard will honor them. We do not break contracts, I shrugged casually. Of course, when they are up for renewal. The implication hung in the air like a guillotine. Without TechSource, Harrington Estates would lose its competitive edge in the luxury property market. The £200 million project would stall. The company would bleed millions. All because my father had put all his eggs in one basket, and I now owned that basket. Fiona reached into her briefcase again and pulled out another folder. This one was labelled Correspondence. Ms. Harrington, she said formally, shall I proceed with the supplementary files? I nodded. 2 months ago, Fiona began, Lord Robert Harrington sent an email to 45 investors and business partners across Greater London. My father blanched. What are you talking about? Fiona pulled out a printed email and began to read. Dear colleagues, it is my unfortunate duty to warn you that my daughter, Eleanor Harrington, may approach you with investment opportunities. Despite bearing the Harrington name, She lacks fundamental business acumen and holds no formal degree from a reputable institution. I apologize in advance for any amateurish ventures she might present to you. Please direct any serious investment inquiries to my son, Alistair, who possesses the appropriate qualifications and a true understanding of genuine enterprise." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. "Did you actually send that?" a prominent investor asked my father in total disbelief. Fiona continued, "This email was forwarded to the board of Vanguard Holdings by 3 separate recipients who found it highly concerning. Every major investor in the UK tech sector received that email," I said quietly, "including the 12 individuals who sit on my board of directors." "You actively tried to sabotage your own daughter?" Charles Wentworth sounded thoroughly disgusted. My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "There is more," Fiona said, pulling out another document. "This email was sent last week, 3 days before the wedding. Quote, 'Keep Eleanor away from the VIP guests. She will only embarrass us with her presence. Ensure she is seated where she cannot bother the real business minds.'" That email went to 47 people, I said, all of whom are currently in this room. The silence was deafening. "When my board saw that email," I continued, "they found it highly revealing. They asked me if this sort of behavior was typical of my father. I informed them that it was." Fiona produced another file. Upon receiving these communications, the board of Vanguard Holdings initiated a thorough review of Lord Robert Harrington's business practices. Their findings were highly illuminating. "What review?" my father demanded, a spark of anger finally breaking through his shock. "You had no right. Public records. Lord Harrington." Fiona talked over him. "Court documents, company's house filings, grievance tribunals, all entirely public. The pattern they discovered was deeply troubling. 17 former business partners reported identical tactics. Family members frozen out of businesses. A brother who fled to New York after you, quote, destroyed his reputation in the city." Aunt Beatrice stood up from table 6. "Edward," she cried out. "That's why Edward left. You told us all he was mentally unstable." "The board's conclusion," Fiona continued, reading directly from the report, "was that Lord Robert Harrington poses a severe reputational risk to any organization he is associated with. They recommended expediting certain acquisitions to mitigate that risk." "You mean to say," an executive said slowly, "that Vanguard bought these specific companies because a full investigation proved that Robert Harrington's empire is built on manipulation and familial sabotage?" "Precisely," Fiona finished. "The board believes that a man who actively sabotages his own daughter will have zero qualms about betraying his business partners." "This is slander," Alistair yelled. "Alistair, it is documented fact," Fiona replied coolly. "Every single allegation is backed by public records and sworn affidavits." My father sank heavily into a chair, his legs finally giving out. The king of the London property market, the man who dominated every room he ever entered, suddenly looked very small and very old. "They knew," he whispered. "Your board knew exactly what I was doing to you. They knew exactly who you were," I confirmed. Charles Wentworth, who had been speaking quietly into his phone, looked up with sudden, sharp comprehension. "Robert, wait," he said. "Aren't you the chairman of the Capital Campaign Board for Great Ormond Street Hospital?" My father nodded dumbly. "The same hospital that just received an anonymous £50 million donation?" Charles trailed off, looking directly at me. "From Vanguard Holdings." The room began to buzz. Several board members from various London charities were now watching very, very closely. "That is the single largest donation in the hospital's history," someone whispered. "The new pediatric wing completely depends on it." "The donation is currently under review," I stated simply. The director of development for the hospital, who was seated at table 4, stood up in a panic. "Miss Harrington, please, the children." "The donation will be honoured," I assured her instantly. "Vanguard Holdings keeps its promises. However, we do require that our partner organizations share our corporate values of integrity and respect. Board members who publicly humiliate their family members, who sabotage their own children, who engage in systematic emotional abuse, do not align with our values. We do not associate with such individuals." "This is blackmail," my father roared, finding his voice again. "I am stating our corporate policy," I replied coldly. "We do not partner with people who have documented histories of abusive behavior. It damages our brand." "She's right," the director of development said slowly. "If this goes public, if our donors learn that our chairman actively tried to destroy his own daughter's business, we could lose tens of millions in other pledges." "The Whitmore Foundation is reconsidering as well," someone said, staring at their screen. "They've just sent an emergency alert to their trustees." My father looked around the room, watching in real time as his carefully constructed world of influence evaporated. Every charity board, every exclusive club membership, every prestigious chairmanship, they all rested entirely on his reputation. And I had just dismantled it using his own words. Aunt Beatrice still hadn't sat down. "He has always operated like this," she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Our brother Edward, who ran off to New York. Robert destroyed his construction firm by spreading rumors that he was embezzling funds. Edward was completely innocent." "Beatrice, stop it. I was merely protecting our contracts," my father pleaded weakly. "No," she shot back. "I have kept my mouth shut for 30 years. You did the exact same thing to Cousin Mary when she opened her restaurant. At every gathering, you mocked her as the family cook, until investors thought she was a laughingstock. She lost everything. That was completely different," my father started. "Was it?" Beatrice pressed, her voice gaining strength. "And then there is Eleanor's mother, your first wife. You told everyone in London she abandoned her child. But she didn't, did she?" My chest tightened painfully. For my entire life, I had wondered what really happened to my mother, who vanished when I was 2 years old. "She fought for custody for 3 agonizing years," Beatrice said, looking at me with tears brimming in her eyes. "But Robert had better barristers, more money, and more connections in the courts. She died believing you hated her, Eleanor. She died believing she had failed you." The ballroom was silent save for Beatrice's shaky breathing. "You're lying," my father spat, but there was no conviction left in his voice. "My mother kept all the court records," Beatrice countered. "And your letters, where you threatened to ruin anyone who tried to help her. I have them. I have always had them." Alistair stared at our father as though looking at a monster. "Is this true?" "I wasn't special," I said quietly. "I was just the latest in a very long line. Family betrayal cuts the deepest, because it comes from those whose absolute duty is to protect us. But this is what I have learned. Their opinion does not dictate your worth. Your success is the most powerful answer you can give. If you agree, press like and tell me. Have you ever proved a doubter wrong? Share your moment in the comments." Suddenly, my father sprang up. His chair screeched violently across the marble floor. His face morphed from pale defeat to crimson rage. "This is my grandson's wedding," he screamed. "How dare you ruin it with these lies and manipulations? I paid for this wedding." "Did you?" I asked, holding up my phone to display the banking transfer. £327,000, paid in full 3 months ago. The wedding planner stepped forward again. "She is absolutely right, Lord Harrington. Every single vendor was paid directly by Miss Harrington. The flowers, the catering, the Savoy itself, even the band. You took credit for my money while calling me a disgrace," I said to him. "The embossed invitations claiming you were the host? I paid for them." "This is absurd," he snarled. "The Waterford crystal everyone is drinking from? I bought it. The Pol Roger in those glasses? My Amex. The English roses covering this room? My budget." I scrolled through receipt after receipt, holding them up. "Every single element of this wedding that you have spent the evening taking credit for, every penny came from the woman you just called a disappointment." Arthur stood up at the top table. "It's true. Mum paid for everything. Grandfather just insisted on sending the invitations." "You knew this?" Alistair asked Arthur, completely bewildered. "Of course I did," Arthur snapped. "And I also know that Mum offered to pay for your wedding 5 years ago, Uncle Alistair. But Grandfather said it would be embarrassing to accept money from her. The irony was so thick you could have carved it with one of the silver steak knives I had also paid for." Fiona extracted one final document from her Vanguard Holdings folder. 3 months ago, she announced, Harrington Estates submitted a proposal to Vanguard Holdings for a £500 million joint venture. Alistair's head snapped up. "That was highly confidential." "Ah, it became part of our internal records the moment you submitted it," Fiona replied smoothly. "The proposal was reviewed by the entire board. Ms. Harrington recused herself due to a personal conflict of interest." You saw our proposal?" my father asked hollowly. "I didn't vote on it," I said. "But yes, I saw it. You pitched your business to your own daughter's company without even realizing it." Fiona continued reading. The board's decision was unanimous. The proposal was rejected due to severe concerns regarding the applicant's business ethics, specifically their treatment of partners and their systematic undermining of competitors through personal attacks rather than market competition. Furthermore, she added, the board noted that Lord Robert Harrington actively attempted to sabotage the CEO of Vanguard Holdings through targeted professional defamation, rendering any partnership impossible. "You cost us £500 million, Alistair said to our father, his voice cracking with despair. The board specifically highlighted this email, Fiona said, holding up a familiar sheet of paper, sent by Robert Harrington to the exact investors Vanguard Holdings was negotiating with. Quote, "The amateurish ventures of my daughter are an embarrassment to the Harrington name." "You sent that to our investors?" Alistair shrieked, launching himself out of his chair. "To the very people we were trying to partner with." "The irony," I said softly, "is that if you had simply left me alone, if you had ignored me as you usually do, would you have secured the deal?" Alistair spun around to face me, his Oxford facade completely obliterated. "You are destroying this family. You are destroying everything we've built." "I have done absolutely nothing to this family," I replied evenly. "The supply contracts with TechSource remain unchanged. Your terms are identical. Prices are locked in for another 2 years. But," I continued, my voice turning to ice, "when you do what Father has done, publicly humiliate me, actively sabotage my business, write to investors calling me a disgrace, then it is no longer personal. It is simply business." At that moment, Alistair's wife, Victoria, who had sat in silence all evening, finally spoke up. "Alistair, stop it. Can't you see what has happened here? Your father created this situation." "Victoria, you don't understand," Alistair pleaded. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Victoria fired back. "For 7 years I have watched him belittle Eleanor. I have sat through countless dinners where he praised you for deals that weren't half as impressive as what she was building. I kept quiet. But I am done." She turned to me. "That startup you sold years ago. I looked it up after we met. £50 million. You were 28. Alistair was still at Oxford, spending his father's money." "Victoria," Alistair protested. "It's the truth," she said steadily. "Your sister built an empire while your father publicly paraded her as a failure. And you let it happen, because it benefited you." "I do not use business for revenge," I said, looking straight into Alistair's eyes. "But I also do not do business with people who actively try to harm me. This is not vengeance. These are boundaries. My father launched one final, desperate offensive. Everyone in this room knows I built the wealth of this family. Who are you going to believe? This ambush, or 40 years of the Harrington legacy?" He looked wildly around the room, seeking validation. "Who actually believes this utter nonsense? Stand with me." His voice retained a ghost of its former command. "Show her that money cannot buy respect." For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. 300 guests sat frozen in their seats, their eyes darting between my father and me. Then, Charles Wentworth stood up. "I believe it," he said firmly, "because I signed the contracts, because I conducted the due diligence on Vanguard Holdings, because I know exactly who bought my company." Another executive stood up. "I believe it too. My firm has been trying to identify the phantom buyer for months. We had Eleanor on our radar, but we dismissed the idea because her own father told everyone in the city she was incompetent." One by one, people began to stand. Not for my father, but facing me. "We've all worked with Vanguard," a woman said. "Brilliant, strategic, ethical. Everything Robert claims to be, but isn't." The director of development for Great Ormond Street stood up. "Ms. Harrington's donations saved our expansion project. She asked for absolutely nothing in return, except high ethical standards. Even within the family there was movement. Uncle Geoffrey, my father's brother, stood up. I am sick to death of pretending everything is fine. Robert, you have been a tyrant our entire lives. You drove Edward out of the country. You bullied Mary out of her livelihood. Now you tried to break Eleanor, but she was too strong for you. Too clever," Aunt Beatrice corrected him, standing tall. "She let you believe she was weak while she built something you could never even dream of." By the end of it, more than 200 people were standing in solidarity with me, their backs effectively turned on my father. The king had lost his court. Alistair remained in his seat, looking helplessly between our father and the crowd. "Your father just lost the room," Charles Wentworth noted quietly. "In business, that is everything." Fiona reached into her briefcase one final time. "There is one last document," she said. "An email sent yesterday by Lord Robert Harrington to 40 recipients, all of whom are in this room." My father's face turned the colour of ash. Fiona read it aloud. "Keep Eleanor away from the VIP guests. She will only embarrass us with her presence. Seat her as far from the top table as possible. Should she attempt to speak to investors or business partners, intervene immediately. We cannot afford her amateurish antics damaging the Harrington reputation." Fiona looked up, her gaze piercing. This email was sent 18 hours after the Sunday Times Rich List preview was published, after the FCA filings were made public, after anyone with a Google search bar could have discovered that Eleanor Harrington is worth £2.3 billion. You still wanted to humiliate her, someone shouted from the crowd, even after you knew. I didn't know, my father protested frantically. Because it never once occurred to you to Google your own daughter, I said, my voice eerily calm. 20 years of success, and not once did you ever search for my name. That is how little I meant to you. The timestamp indicates you sent this email after 3 separate people had already contacted you regarding the Sunday Times article, Fiona added mercilessly. You knew. You simply refused to accept it. The wedding photographer, who had been discreetly documenting the entire evening, suddenly spoke up. I have photographs of the original seating plan. Miss Harrington was deliberately placed at the overflow table, despite paying for the entire event. You planned my humiliation meticulously, I said simply. You just didn't factor in my success. The room fell deadly quiet, save for the incessant pinging of mobile notifications. The story was already leaking. A woman at table 8 stood up holding a tablet. I am Jennifer, from Forbes UK. I was invited as a +1, but this has turned into quite a remarkable turn of events. My father's eyes bulged. A financial journalist had witnessed the entire spectacle. We are running a cover story on Vanguard Holdings and Miss Harrington in our next issue, Jennifer continued. The article goes live online on Monday, and I can confirm everything that is already in the public domain. Eleanor Harrington. Net worth, £2.3 billion. Entirely self-made. No inheritance, no family money, no contacts, she didn't forge herself. She turned the tablet to show the room the preview screen. A photograph of me dominated the digital cover. The headline read, The Phantom Billionaire, How Eleanor Harrington Built a Tech Empire in the Shadows. The subheading followed. We trace her 20-year journey from a teenage single mother to one of Britain's most powerful tech investors. This can't be real, my father whispered. We verified everything, Jennifer said calmly. Every acquisition, every sale, every strategic pivot. While you called her an embarrassment, Lord Harrington, Forbes calls her a revolutionary. She scrolled further down. There is also a highly compelling section detailing how she achieved this success despite active, aggressive sabotage from her own family. We didn't name names in the original draft, she said, letting her gaze sweep over the devastated top table. But I think we may need to revise that before publication. You can't print this, Alistair cried out, utterly panicked. I print facts, Jennifer countered smoothly. And the fact is, your sister built £1 billion empire while her own father sent emails trying to destroy her reputation. That isn't gossip. That is news. And the best part, she added, looking straight at my father, is a quote from one of your own investors. We always wondered why Robert Harrington tried so desperately to keep us away from his daughter. Now we know why. She was the actual talent in the family. The director of development from Gosh stepped cautiously towards me, wringing her hands. Miss Harrington, please, she said loud enough for the room to hear. Whatever happens between you and your father, please do not punish the children. That $50 million is for a new pediatric oncology ward. For the first time since the revelations began, I stepped away from table 12. The funding remains securely in place, I stated clearly. Every single pound. Vanguard Holdings does not punish children for the cruelty of adults. Visible, sweeping relief washed over her face. However, I continued, we have strict requirements for our partners. Board members must adhere to specific ethical standards. We cannot associate our firm with individuals who have a documented history of emotional abuse, professional sabotage, or systemic bullying. I looked directly at my father. Robert Harrington must resign from the hospital board with immediate effect. You cannot demand that, my father protested. I am demanding nothing, I replied coolly. I am simply stating the conditions under which the donation will proceed. The hospital may choose £50 million for sick children, or a board member who publicly humiliates his own family. The chairman of the hospital board, who was also in attendance, stood up solemnly. Robert, I am terribly sorry, but the choice is obvious. We need those funds. This is extortion, my father cried. These are consequences, I corrected him. You have spent decades using your positions to damage people. That ends tonight. She is absolutely right, another charity board member chimed in. Robert, we've turned a blind eye to a lot of things over the years because of your donations. But with what we know now, and with $50 million on the line, we simply cannot keep you. The Victoria and Albert Museum will be having the same discussion. Someone else interjected. The Royal Philharmonic as well. One by one, my father's prestigious chairmanships evaporated into thin air. The social capital he had hoarded for decades was suddenly entirely worthless. Fiona walked over and handed my father a thick, sealed envelope. Lord Harrington, this is formal notification from Vanguard Holdings. With trembling hands, he took it. Effective Monday morning, Fiona declared, Vanguard Holdings and all its subsidiaries will terminate all existing partnerships with Harrington Estates. This includes preferred supplier statuses, joint development contracts, and all pending proposals. That is £500 million in annual revenue, Alistair stammered, looking as though he might faint. More accurately, £523 million, if you factor in the secondary contracts, I corrected. I know this, because I audited every single one. You are going to destroy us, my father said, his voice entirely broken. No, I replied softly. You did that yourselves. I am simply refusing to facilitate it any longer. The other executives in the room were already doing the mental arithmetic. If Vanguard was pulling out, they would follow suit. An association with Harrington Estates had just become incredibly toxic. Wentworth Industries will be reviewing our contracts as well, Charles announced. We do not do business with firms that treat their own blood like enemy combatants. The same goes for Meridian Solutions, another CEO added. London Financial Group is withdrawing as well, came another voice from the back. In a matter of minutes, Harrington Estates had not only lost its Vanguard contracts, but the trust of a massive cross-section of the London business community. The empire my father had spent 40 years building was crumbling in real time. All of this because of an email? My father asked, sounding utterly lost. No, I said quietly. Because of hundreds of emails. Because of years of sabotage and decades of cruelty. The emails are simply the proof of who you really are. Alistair was typing frantically, likely trying to calculate if the firm could survive a sudden 50% drop in revenue. The contracts stipulate a 90-day transition period, Fiona added professionally. That is more generous than legally required. Ms. Harrington insisted upon it, entirely against my recommendation for immediate termination. Arthur stood up at the top table, walked over to the bandleader, and took the microphone. The room fell perfectly silent. I want everyone here to know something, Arthur said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. My mother built everything she has from absolute scratch. She was 18, pregnant with me, abandoned by my father, and dismissed by her own family. He looked squarely at my father. While my grandfather inherited his company from his father, my mother built hers with her own bare hands. While he was handed every advantage, she had to bleed for every opportunity. Arthur, sit down, my father ordered weakly. No, Arthur said. I have stayed quiet my entire life while you insulted her at every Christmas dinner, while you praised Uncle Alistair for million-pound deals and dismissed my mother's billion-pound empire as playing with computers. He turned to address the room. Do you want to know the truth? My mother offered to pay my entire tuition at Imperial College Medical School, all of it. My grandfather insisted on paying it himself, because he said it would be embarrassing to take her money. He looked back at my father. Then you went around telling everyone you were supporting us. It was a lie. I have the emails, grandfather. Mum kept all of them. Every cruel word, every slight, every time you told someone she was a disappointment. Arthur's voice grew thicker with emotion. She didn't keep them out of spite. She kept them so I would understand that other people's opinions do not determine our worth. He looked at me, tears shining in his eyes. I am so incredibly proud to be Eleanor Harrington's son. I am proud that she built an empire while raising me on her own. I am proud that she never once spoke ill of the family that rejected her, even when she had every right to. Then, leaning into the microphone, he said quietly, But let's be absolutely clear. Mum, you are not the family disgrace. You are the hero of this family, someone shouted from the crowd, and everyone in this room knows it. My father left the wedding before the cake was even cut. He walked out of the Savoy in total silence. His empire lay in ruins, his reputation was decimated, and his carefully curated facade had been shattered beyond repair. Alistair followed him, but paused briefly by my side. The supply contracts, he said weakly. Will you actually honor the transition? Submit a tender like everyone else, I answered calmly. Vanguard evaluates every vendor based on merit. Then we'll never be approved. Well, perhaps you should have thought of that before you sat by while father sent those emails. Within an hour, I had moved from the overflow table to the absolute center of the room. Business cards were pressed into my hands faster than I could pocket them. Before the band even started their second set, 3 different firms approached me regarding potential buyouts. Ms. Harrington, one CEO said, we've been trying to secure a meeting with Vanguard for months. Send the proposal to my office, I replied, handing him Fiona's card. We review everything. The celebration continued without my father and Alistair, and strangely, the atmosphere grew incredibly light. The dark shadow that had loomed over every family gathering for decades had finally lifted. Towards the end of the evening, Victoria, my brother's wife, approached me. "I am filing for divorce," she said softly. "For 7 years I've watched him turn into your father. I am not waiting around for him to do to our children what Robert did to you." "I am so sorry," I said honestly. "Don't be," she replied. "You showed me what is possible when you refused to settle for less than you deserve." By the time the final dance was played, I had received 17 LinkedIn requests, 12 acquisition pitches, and 6 invitations to sit on corporate boards. In the span of 3 hours, I had transformed from the family disgrace to the most sought-after contact in London. 3 days later, the Times ran the headline, "Family feud costs property patriarch £500, million and multiple board seats." The Financial Times followed up with, "How sabotaging your own daughter can destroy an empire." Within a week, my father had lost 6 chairmanships, £500 million in annual revenue, 60% of his investors, his memberships to 3 exclusive Mayfair clubs, and every ounce of credibility he had in the City of London. Alistair's firm immediately began to flounder. Stripped of its preferred supplier status, and stripped of the protective halo of the Harrington name, Harrington Estates was revealed for what it truly was, an average, bloated firm surviving purely on inherited privilege. Its share price dropped 40% in 5 days. My phone, meanwhile, never stopped ringing. It seemed every family disgrace in Britain had found my story. Thousands of messages poured in from people who had been belittled, overlooked, or actively sabotaged by their own families. "You gave me hope," one person wrote. "I am 30, and my parents still introduce me as their mistake, because I became a teacher instead of a doctor. Your story reminded me that their opinion doesn't dictate my worth." Another message read, "I built a hugely successful restaurant chain while my family told everyone I was just playing chef. Last week, I bought the country estate that used to refuse me entry. Thank you for showing me that success doesn't require their approval." The Forbes UK article, hastily updated with details from the wedding at the Savoy, became the most shared business story of the year. The headline was changed to, "The £2.3 billion revenge that wasn't. How Eleanor Harrington's success exposed a toxic family legacy." My favourite reaction, however, came from a name I hadn't seen in 30 years. Edward Harrington, my uncle in New York. "Well done, niece. About time somebody stood up to the old bastard." 2 weeks after the wedding, a heavy envelope landed on my desk. My father's handwriting, still demanding, even when he was begging. "Eleanor, we need to talk. Despite recent misunderstandings, we are still family. I am willing to put this all behind us if you are. Family must stick together, especially in difficult times. Let us meet at my club to discuss how we move forward." Not a single word of apology. No acknowledgement of the damage he caused. Just misunderstandings and a demand to forget the past. Fiona read it over my shoulder. "He has lost absolutely everything. That is pure desperation." "No," I corrected her. "That is manipulation." Same script. Different day. I dictated my response. "Robert, my door is open when you are prepared to apologize publicly as you humiliated me. When you stand before the exact same 300 people you called me a disgrace in front of, and admit that you were wrong. When you confess that you sabotaged my career, lied about my mother, and attempted to destroy my company. Until then, we have absolutely nothing to discuss, and it is Ims Harrington. You forfeited the right to call yourself my father the moment you placed cruelty above humanity. Eleanor Harrington, CEO, Vanguard Holdings." Fiona sent the letter via recorded delivery. Signature required. The response came 2 days later via Alistair. "Dad says you are being entirely unreasonable. He is willing to acknowledge that mistakes were made on both sides." "Both sides?" I asked calmly down the phone. "What was my mistake, Alistair? Building a business? Succeeding in spite of him? He has lost everything, Eleanor." "No," I said. "He lost what he built on cruelty. I will not apologize for exposing the truth." Alistair hung up. We haven't spoken since. My boundaries were crystal clear: accountability or absence. I accept nothing in between. 6 months have passed since that night at the Savoy. My father's property empire is a mere shadow of its former glory. Alistair's firm has filed for corporate restructuring. The family that once dominated London society has become a cautionary case study at business schools. But here is what I have learned. Success is not revenge. I didn't build Vanguard Holdings to prove them wrong. I built it because I could. Because I had ideas worth pursuing and the sheer will to execute them. Their opinions became entirely irrelevant somewhere around my 3rd acquisition. The best boundary is not a brick wall. It is indifference. When you truly know your own worth, you don't need anyone else to validate it. Not your father, not your family, Not the people who should have loved you, but chose judgment instead. I still drive my Tesla Model 3, even though I could afford a fleet of Bentleys. I still live in my terraced house in Islington, even though I could buy up my father's entire Mayfair portfolio. Those things do not define me. They never did. What defines me is that for 20 years, I dragged myself up every single morning and built something real. While they obsessed over preserving a legacy, I was busy creating one. While they hoarded their inheritance, I earned my wealth. My son Arthur is now a doctor at Great Ormond Street, working in the very pediatric oncology ward that Vanguard funded. He introduces himself as Dr. Arthur Harrington, Eleanor Harrington's son. That is his choice, and it means absolutely everything to me. The Harrington family disgrace turned out to be the only real Harrington worth remembering. When you know your worth, you don't need anyone to confirm it for you. That is not arrogance, that is peace. And peace, I have finally learned, is the only true success. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever been the disappointment of the family, the one who didn't fit the mold, remember that your path does not require their approval. Success is the best answer, but peace is the ultimate victory. Subscribe if you enjoyed this. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And always remember, you define your own worth, nobody else.